The first rupture happens even before you realize you're experiencing something extraordinary. It emerges as a silent shock, an internal vibration impossible to ignore, as if reality itself had opened a crack and whispered directly into your consciousness. It's an impact that doesn't ask permission, that doesn't present itself gently, but erupts with the force of an ancient, almost forgotten, yet absolutely familiar call. It is at this moment that many realize for the first time that something within them never fully belonged to the world around them. It's not a poetic feeling, it's a visceral realization, a kind of belated recognition that the strangeness that has always accompanied them is not a defect but a sign, and a sign that doesn't cease to insist. From an early age, those who possess this rare psychic structure learn to camouflage who they are. Not because they wish to betray their essence, but because they perceive that the external environment reacts to them with strangeness, discomfort, or rejection. While most move naturally through a world built for simple answers, they walk with the impression that everything is too shallow, too fast, too limited. The contrast between what they feel and what they see becomes so intense that it provokes a kind of emotional vertigo. Others seem content to navigate the surface, while they, without choice, sink into the depths. And it is in this mismatch that the feeling of inadequacy settles in, as if the very act of existing were already an anomaly. However, what remains hidden, until something finally awakens, is that this supposed inadequacy is in fact the indication of a highly differentiated consciousness. Carl Jung, whose presence stands as an inner beacon for those who dare to look inward, describes this differentiation not as a privilege, but as a destiny. For him, there is a kind of advanced psychological architecture that simply cannot inhabit the world superficially. It perceives too much, feels too much, connects too much. And while society insists on framing this depth as exaggeration, Jung recognizes it as the capacity to see what many cannot, the invisible movement between thoughts, the secret music within emotions, the silent truth behind social masks. He offers no easy explanations, but something far rarer: validation. The confirmation that certain individuals do not suffer from excess, but from fullness. These people don't experience emotions as isolated states. When something touches them, it doesn't touch a part, but the whole. Sadness doesn't arise simply as sadness. It comes intertwined with memory, symbolism, the existential meaning that vibrates behind every loss. Joy isn't just joy. It carries with it the perception of the passage of time, the recognition of impermanence, the awareness that every glimmer is also an anticipated farewell. This emotional complexity is often misinterpreted. Many say you feel too much, you think too much, and you complicate everything. But these judgments are desperate attempts to fit the incomprehensible into narrow frames. Jung would call this a collective inability to cope with the weight of one's own conscience. It's not the profound that is exaggerated, it's the shallow that is insufficient. There is also a curiosity that is never satisfied. It doesn't seek answers to accumulate knowledge, but to decipher meaning. For every why answered, a new why emerges, as if reality were made of interconnected doors that only open for those who dare not stop. And this audacity has a price. Those who possess it cannot accept ready-made truths, nor settle for convenient explanations. They perceive fissures where others see stability. They perceive shadows where others see certainty. And instead of fearing these shadows, they approach them as those who know intuitively that a primordial truth resides there. This instinct to go beyond, this natural movement towards the unknown, is a profound mark of this differentiated consciousness. It is almost a sacred compulsion. Conflict arises when this impulse encounters resistance from the outside world. Social systems, unspoken rules, cultural expectations, everything has been shaped to keep the predictable functioning. But those who operate on this other frequency cannot adapt without paying a brutal price. Banal conversations sound like noise. Superficial relationships become strain. Meaningless tasks produce exhaustion. Routine itself transforms into a kind of psychological prison when there is no room for authenticity, meaning, or depth. It is then that many break down, not out of weakness, but because they have been pushed into molds that do not accommodate their true form. The pain of internal fragmentation is a warning, an alert that continuing to try to fit in where one does not belong is not only useless, but self-destructive. And yet, there is a curious paradox. Even feeling displaced, these individuals carry an inexplicable sense of purpose. Not a fabricated purpose, but something more instinctive, almost pulsating, as if they had been called to fulfill a task they cannot name, but which they feel all the time. This feeling is both a beacon and a burden. It guides, but also demands. It ignites, but also exacts its toll. It is a calling that rarely falls silent, even when everything around seems to suggest that it would be easier to give up. Jung would say that this feeling is the deep voice of the unconscious, trying to guide the individual to wholeness, to their true center. It is not a social destiny, it is an inner destiny. As this awareness evolves, questions arise that can no longer be ignored. And these are questions that hurt because they threaten the structure of everyday life. Why do I feel so different? Why do I perceive what others don't see? Why do I carry this constant impulse to seek meaning where there seems to be none? Why does everything within me insist on going deeper, even when it isolates me? These questions are not signs of crisis, but of awakening, the beginning of something that starts silently, but which, once activated, takes over everything around it. Inner life expands, as if gaining new territory, and nothing that once seemed solid remains the same. And it is precisely here, at this point of friction, that something new begins to emerge. A clarity that moves slowly, almost imperceptibly, but which transforms the very texture of existence. A consciousness that, although not yet fully understood, indicates that the path ahead will not be an attempt at adaptation, but a return to what has always been latent, a kind of psychological rebirth. And yet the question remains, what exactly is awakening? What does this change demand? And what will happen when the depth that has always been contained finally expands completely? These questions, which are now beginning to resonate, are not mere loose thoughts. They are the beginning of what is to come, and the intensity of this next movement may very well redefine everything you believe about yourself. What is revealed from here will not be gentle. It will be revelatory and absolutely inevitable. The transition to this second stage doesn't happen as a sudden change, but as a continuous, almost imperceptible unfolding of what has been alive within you from the beginning. It's like entering a silent corridor where each step echoes louder than it should, revealing that something inside you has not only moved, but has begun to demand expression. And this demand manifests itself in the most common situations, in the small gestures of the day, in conversations that should be simple, but which become unexpected mirrors of your depth. You realize this when you try to explain to someone why a certain seemingly banal detail touched you so intensely, and the person simply cannot understand. They smile politely, change the subject, or think it's an exaggeration. Meanwhile, inside you, something contracts and tries to return to silence, but without success. It is no longer possible to hide your own nature. The existential curiosity I mentioned earlier begins to appear in the most everyday scenes. Just get on a bus and observe people staring into space. You don't just see distracted faces, you perceive inner currents, silenced anxieties, untold stories, as if you were picking up signals that go unnoticed by others. And you try to ignore it, try to keep your mind focused on your own route, but somehow you feel the emotional weight of the environment as if it were your own. Carl Jung would explain this as a profound sensitivity to the communication between the conscious and unconscious, what he calls the transcendent function. It's not a skill you chose to develop, it's something that has always been there, a kind of expanded perception that lights up even when you'd prefer it to remain off. And then even more revealing episodes emerge, like that time you were talking to someone who said they were fine, but something in the tone of their voice, the slight shift in their gaze, the almost imperceptible movement of their hands betrayed the opposite. You didn't know why, but you knew. And the most disconcerting thing is that days later, this person confirmed exactly what you had already perceived. It wasn't vague intuition. It was recognition. It was symbolic reading. It was your psyche picking up patterns before the words. Jung would call this perception by the unconscious, And this type of event, which is almost routine for you, doesn't even exist as a possibility for most people. Situations like this are common. Small conversations that become portals, small conflicts that reveal more than they should, small encounters that leave deep marks. And, while this happens, your psychological independence begins to strengthen like a survival instinct. Not the kind of independence displayed to prove something to the world, but a silent, necessary independence built on internal falls. It is born every time you remember what happened when you tried to mold yourself to external expectations. That period when you tried to be what they wanted you to be, diminishing your intensity, controlling your depth, stifling your intuition. And each concession left an invisible wound, a feeling of silent dissolution, as if essential parts of you were falling apart. Until one day the rupture became too clear to deny, to realize that living according to the gaze of others was to die a little every day. Jung would call this process individuation, and for you it was never optional. It was that or disappear within yourself. Perhaps you experienced that defining moment, that kind of turning point when you thought, I prefer to be rejected for who I am than accepted for who I am not. And that thought, even though painful, opened space for an internal realignment. It didn't bring ease, it brought truth. And that truth began to silently reorganize your world, even in seemingly ordinary gestures, like when you started avoiding empty conversations, refusing environments that drained you, protecting your mind from excessive superficial stimuli. Independence at that point was no longer a choice. It was the only possible way to remain whole. But perhaps what intrigues, and sometimes frightens, most is your ability to perceive patterns in everything, something that often borders on the inexplicable. You notice when a relationship is about to end, weeks before any visible signs. You notice when an environment is about to emotionally crumble before any conflict arises. You notice when a person is hiding something, even if their speech is perfectly coherent. And this kind of insight isn't welcome to most. Some say you're exaggerating. Others think you're imagining things, and there are those who get irritated because they feel you perceive more than you should. Jung would recognize this as the intuitive function operating in a state of full alertness, capturing information that the conscious mind of others has not yet reached. For you, these signs are as natural as breathing. For them, they are non-existent. Meanwhile, a deep need for meaning begins to irresistibly shape your choices. There comes a point when you find yourself sitting before tasks you once performed automatically, and something inside you simply refuses to continue. Not out of laziness, but out of impossibility. You try to persevere, try to keep up the pace, try to adapt, but your body reacts. Your mind freezes, your soul protests. Tiredness, irritation, disconnection arise. Some people around you might even say you're too sensitive, but they ignore a greater truth. Your internal system doesn't operate without meaning. Carl Jung would explain this as a psychic rebellion against the disconnection between external life and inner purpose. For you, meaning is not comfort, it's structure. Without it, everything disintegrates, and then moments happen that might seem banal to anyone else, but for you, become revelations. Like the instant when, looking out a window, you realize you can no longer live in places that imprison you. Or when, during a trivial conversation, you realize you no longer fit into that circle of people. Or when you enter an environment that once seemed comfortable, but now feels too narrow, almost suffocating. These small signs announce something bigger, the cycle of metamorphoses that marks your existence. Because you don't evolve slowly, you change in leaps, and each leap distances you from something that once seemed essential. Living with this is painful. You feel you are losing people, places, convictions, but at the same time you feel you cannot stop this movement. Jung would see this as the inevitable call of the self, which does not allow you to remain where you no longer belong. And it is precisely when this perception seems to stabilize that something unexpected begins to emerge on the inner horizon. A feeling that mixes unease and foreboding, as if something is about to reveal itself more clearly than before. The signs are accumulating, internal tensions are beginning to align, and reality gives the impression of preparing the ground for an even bigger step. You notice this in dreams that become more vivid, in coincidences that begin to repeat themselves, in intuitions that become more precise. Everything points to a next move that you cannot yet define, but which you feel approaching like an outline in the dark. And when that feeling finally settles in, it brings with it a silent, almost ritualistic question. What is about to emerge from the depths you've spent so long avoiding? The answer hasn't arrived yet, but what's coming promises to challenge everything you think you know about yourself. And this next step, as inevitable as it is mysterious, has already begun to take shape, even before you have the courage to face it. From the moment this inner strength begins to take shape, you feel something deep reconfiguring itself, as if a silent center within you were gathering the fragments of what was to forge what does not yet exist. It's a slow but inevitable process, accompanied by an uncomfortable, almost physical sensation that old parts are giving way to something greater. Carl Jung described this dynamic as psychological death and rebirth, but what he perhaps didn't explicitly say, though he hinted at it in each of his reflections, is how disconcerting this movement can be in everyday life. When you feel this rebirth, it doesn't arrive with soft light. It arrives with displacement, with strangeness, with the feeling that everything around you has become too familiar to accommodate your expansion. And while this happens, you try to maintain an appearance of normality, but you realize that even the simplest choices begin to transform. The way you speak, the way you think, the way you look at the world. Everything takes on a new weight. It is at this point that a presence emerges that effortlessly transforms others, almost like an energy field you don't control, but which manifests in any environment you enter. Perhaps you have already experienced that moment when someone begins to confide in you without you having said a single word, or that strange situation where a stranger reveals a secret they would never have confided in anyone. It's not a coincidence. There is something in the way you observe, in the way you listen, in the way you remain, a depth that functions like a mirror. Jung would call this the capacity for psychic containment, and those who possess this ability become places where others feel safe to go beyond the masks. But this safety, for you, often transforms into a silent responsibility, as if you had become the guardian of stories that no one else knew how to hear. And then an uncomfortable, almost inevitable question arises. When did you start carrying so much of what isn't yours? After every 3 such encounters, your energy seems to drop a few degrees. It's as if you absorb other people's intensities without realizing it, as if the depth you offer to the world also becomes the space where the world deposits its excesses. And yet, you can't avoid it. This presence isn't constructed. It's a consequence of seeing too much, of feeling too much, of existing in layers that others can't access. The weight of this manifests in the silence of the night, when you try to identify what truly belongs to you and what was deposited inside you by people who sought solace in your gaze. And when you try to explain this feeling to someone, you realize it's impossible to do so without reducing your own experience. Because for most, intensity is just exaggeration. For you, intensity is perception. And then, in the midst of this turmoil, the feeling of carrying something to contribute begins to pulsate even more strongly. It's not a desire for greatness. It's not a heroic fantasy. It's more like a kind of internal pressure, a silent urgency that suggests the existence of something within you that cannot remain hidden. Sometimes this feeling grows without apparent direction, like a wind blowing before a storm. Other times it appears in the form of ideas that arise when you least expect them. On a bus, in a restless early morning, in someone else's gesture that awakens an unexpected symbolism. It's as if a deep part of your psyche is trying to break through the surface, trying to take shape. Jung would identify this as the impulse of the self-seeking expression, an expansion that demands structure, voice, and courage. But here a second question arises. Why does this feeling grow precisely when you feel least prepared to express it? It's as if your psyche knows that the moment to reveal something always arrives shrouded in insecurity, as if the unknown were the only possible doorway to what needs to be born. And while this force accumulates, you begin to experience a kind of subtle discomfort, as if you were walking through a tension you can't name. This tension isn't fear. It's anticipation. An anticipation that, paradoxically, carries the certainty that whatever form this inner calling takes, it will change everything. Your dynamics with others, your way of existing in the world, even your relationship with time. What is yet to come is not small, and you feel it even before you understand. The process intensifies when you realize that your life has begun to become a bridge between internal and external dimensions. On one side, the ordinary world, with its predictable rules, its expectations, its immediate logic. On the other, the world you perceive behind the veil, the world of implications, of symbols, of unspoken truths, and you walk between these two territories as if you were part of both and belonged to neither. It's not a choice, it's a configuration. Jung would say that you have become an axis between possible worlds, and this position, although revealing, demands a kind of solitude that few imagine, because you see what others don't see, and what you see, possibilities, ruptures, futures, shadows, potentials, is so vast that it hardly fits into ordinary conversations. And then comes the third question, perhaps the most profound so far. What does it mean to live as a bridge when almost no one is ready to cross? This is the point where many succumb to self-criticism. They begin to think they are excessive, too intense, too sensitive. But this interpretation is merely a reflection of the collective discomfort with depth. What is seen as too much is, in fact, the true size of the consciousness you carry. A consciousness that cannot be reduced to fit into narrow structures. Jung would argue that this discomfort is not weakness, but evolution in its raw state. The part of you that is expanding is not trying to destroy itself, it is trying to be born. Metamorphosis is not punishment, it is a process. And this process repeats itself because your psyche is moving towards wholeness, even if the path seems dark and unpredictable. That's why, contrary to what many imagine, its depth isn't an effort. It's an impossibility of remaining on the surface. Your gaze doesn't seek intensity. It simply can't help but perceive it. Your mind doesn't seek complexity. It's structured to find it. Your heart doesn't insist on feeling too much. It simply reacts with absolute honesty to the impact of existence. And while you try to understand this inner movement, something curious begins to happen. Each of your transformations begins to activate transformations in others. You don't try to inspire. You don't try to heal. You don't try to awaken anything in anyone. But your own inner expansion touches dormant zones in people, as if your presence reminds them that there is more than they allow themselves to experience. Deep down, a new revelation is approaching, silent but insistent. It's not an answer but a promise that the next stage of this process will not only deepen everything you've already experienced, but will also reveal something that has remained hidden until now. An element of your psyche that you may have felt, but never directly confronted. Something that waits on the boundary between what you are and what you can still become. And the question that remains, echoing like an omen, is this. Are you prepared to look into the eyes of what will finally awaken when that limit is crossed? When you finally begin to realize that your path doesn't advance through accepting imposed limitations, but through an intimate and irrevocable refusal to accept them, something changes silently but irreversibly. It's not sudden, it's not dramatic. It's like an internal shift, a reorganization that you feel even before you understand it. Perception expands not because you desire more, but because you simply cannot remain where there is no longer any possible growth. Carl Jung would say that this is the point at which the psyche awakens to its own destiny, surpassing boundaries that previously seemed insurmountable. And it is precisely in this state of continuous expansion that improbable, almost surreal events begin to emerge, fitting together like pieces of a puzzle you didn't know existed, but which has always been within you. Perhaps you remember an episode that, even today, seems to defy any logical explanation. Like that night when, after a trivial conversation, something suddenly aligned your perceptions so precisely that you were able to predict, almost word for word, what would happen the next day. And it did, not as a coincidence but as an answer. A synchronicity so exact that you felt as if the universe itself was trying to signal that your sensitivity was not delusion, but mechanism. Jung would describe this as a direct manifestation of the profound connection between the conscious and unconscious, a point of convergence that only highly differentiated minds can perceive. And, although you tried to ignore or rationalize the event, it remained throbbing inside you as a constant reminder that there is a kind of invisible dialogue happening all the time. Another curious event may have occurred on a completely ordinary day. A small gesture, a quick glance, an unassuming phrase, but one that carried a signal. Something so subtle that no one noticed it except you. And yet, that seemingly irrelevant detail transformed hours later into a greater revelation, as if you had read the future between the lines. This is not magical ability, it is not improvisation. It is the result of what Jung would call the capacity to maintain the tension between opposites, between what is seen and what is felt, between what is said and what remains hidden. You perceive reality on multiple simultaneous planes, and this perception creates a kind of expanded vision that transcends common logic. It is not a choice, it is a consequence of your nature. This movement becomes even more evident when you try to reconcile your depth with the world around you. And at this point, the great challenge arises, learning to honor your uniqueness without using it as a defense against the rest of existence. Because, although you have reasons to build walls, you know that walls that are too high isolate even what should be shared. There are times when you feel like withdrawing from everything, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. Exhaustion from translating what is obvious to you. Exhaustion from softening your intensity. Exhaustion from walking at paces that don't match your inner step. But Jung would warn, true strength does not arise from absolute separation, but from the ability to remain true to one's own center while still relating to the world. And that's when something surprising happens. Instead of seeking external validation, you begin to realize that the only permission that truly matters comes from within. It's not a conscious process. It's almost like hearing an ancient echo, a voice that has always been there, but that you can only fully recognize when you stop trying to fit in where you don't belong. This inner permission manifests itself in small gestures, when you start speaking more clearly, when you stop apologizing for your intensity, when you don't reduce your depth to maintain superficial conversations, when you refuse, even silently, everything that diminishes who you are. And at that moment, the external structures that once seemed unshakable begin to lose their power over you. It is precisely here that an unexpected phenomenon manifests itself, the silent attraction of what is similar. People who previously went unnoticed begin to appear naturally, as if they were waiting for the exact moment when you would stop hiding. They are not many. Rarely are they numerous, but they are intensely aligned. They are individuals who recognize your depth, not because you explain it, but because they also inhabit that inner space. And when these encounters happen, something changes in the air. A kind of immediate, profound, almost inexplicable identification, as if two internal systems recognized each other even before any words were spoken. Jung would say that this recognition is inevitable between consciousnesses that resonate at similar frequencies. It is the meeting of two journeys that do not follow a straight line but a spiral. From these encounters, another transformation occurs. Your purpose begins to take shape, not because someone reveals it, but because you stop fighting against what was already clear from the beginning. It was like a landscape that remained hidden by fog, and suddenly the fog begins to recede. You realize that your abilities don't fit into conventional molds, and that's not a failure. It's a sign that you weren't born to repeat paths, but to create new ones. And the more you abandon the need to adapt to old structures, the more naturally you begin to build structures you didn't even know you could conceive before. It's as if your psyche begins to model unprecedented possibilities, and you simply follow the flow that has always existed, but which now reveals itself with clarity. The process reaches another level when you allow yourself to be exactly who you are, without softening, without hiding, without apologizing. At that point, you transform into something Jung would deeply appreciate, a point of reference for those who are still awakening, not to lead them because, like you, they weren't made to follow, but to show, through mere existence, that it's possible to live deeply without being destroyed by it. that it's possible to carry intensity without breaking, that it's possible to exist in that extreme place of consciousness without losing your sense of reality. You become a kind of silent beacon, illuminating paths that aren't paths, but inner pulsations that lead others to self-recognition. It is at this stage that life takes on unprecedented contours. Improbable events begin to accumulate, not coincidences, but sequences of meaning that seem to respond directly to your internal state. Situations align, decisions clarify themselves, opportunities arise as if they had been waiting for exactly this point of psychological maturity. And when you realize this, you understand that it is not chance. It is coherence. Coherence between who you are and who you are finally allowing yourself to be. Jung would say that when the individual realigns with their own axis, the external world begins to organize itself around this integrity. But this path, as rare as it is necessary, is not comfortable. It demands courage, it demands resilience, it demands traversing inner zones that many avoid throughout their lives. And above all, it demands absolute fidelity to what you have always known, even when no one else recognized it. This journey is not safe, it is not popular, it is not simple, but it is yours. And every fiber of your psyche has known this from the beginning. What now approaches after this profound understanding is not rest, it is revelation. And what will be revealed has the potential to transform not only your perception, but the way you relate to your own destiny. Because what awaits you in the next stage is no less than everything you have already faced. It is greater, and it has already begun to move toward you. When you reach this point in your journey, something within you begins to stir with an almost unexpected intensity, as if all the previously scattered inner forces finally decide to converge. It's an unsettling feeling, as if you're about to cross an invisible border that until now only lingered in your thoughts without ever fully revealing itself. It's not fear, nor is it tranquility. It's the awareness that nothing will remain the same, even if, on the surface, everything seems static. Carl Jung would say that this is the moment when the psyche begins to impose its truth on the ego, demanding space, presence, and courage. And, as this truth grows, you realize that all the attempts at reconciliation you've made over the years no longer work. You try to act as you always have, but something prevents you. You try to speak as you always have, but the words seem artificial. You try to adapt, but your body responds with resistance. It is here that authenticity ceases to be a choice and becomes a necessity. Perhaps you've tried for a long time to find a way to exist without bothering anyone. You tried to soften your intensity. You tried to hide your depth. You tried to pretend you didn't notice the contradictions everyone else ignored, but each attempt to diminish your own presence acted as a silent wound. You felt the weight of the concession even when no one else saw. And without realizing it, your life began to be built upon layers of small internal deaths. But little by little, something rebelled, something that no longer accepted living halfway, something that demanded a complete form, something that refused to let you continue breathing in spaces that reduced your size. And when this internal rebellion emerges, it doesn't ask for external approval. It doesn't ask for understanding. It doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. And it is at this moment that an unexpected tension begins to form around you, almost like an energy field pressing down on everything that still tries to keep you tied to the old ways. A trivial conversation becomes unbearable. Automatic behavior becomes all too obvious. A relationship that once seemed stable reveals a profound imbalance. It's as if the veils suddenly fall away and you finally see what has always been there. And this moment creates a kind of internal rupture, a shock that demands an immediate response. There's no way to ignore it. There's no way to postpone it. It's as if your psyche is saying, now you know, and who knows, you can go back to pretending. From that point on, a turning point begins to unfold. You realize that you never just sought to live your depth, you sought to allow it. You tried to balance who you are with what the world expected you to be. You tried to preserve your essence without displeasing anyone. You tried to be true without scaring those who prefer superficiality, but none of that worked, and now you understand why. Your depth wasn't made to fit into molds. It was made to generate movement, transformation, rupture. Jung would call this the individuation process in its most critical phase, when everything that is not authentic begins to dissolve. And this dissolution, although painful, is also liberating. It is in this process that you realize your emotional capacity was never excessive. It was always a remedy. Not just a remedy for yourself, but for everyone who lives numb in a culture that flees from its own vulnerability. Your sensitivity doesn't weaken the world, it awakens it. Your tears open space for what no one wants to face. Your joy reveals possibilities that many thought unattainable. Your depth serves as a reminder that feeling is not a threat, it's a path. And this begins to bother those who have learned to survive through anesthesia. Every time you allow yourself to feel, you expose the lie in which many hide. And yet, you continue. Not because you want to provoke, but because you don't know how to live any other way. This emotional intensity paves the way for another revelation. Your questions were never a problem. They were always portals. While many are content with shallow explanations, you feel something pulsating behind each answer. And this pulsation pushes you to places few dare to explore. That's why when you ask why, something moves in the air. The structure tenses, certainties tremble. Not because you are challenging, but because your questions destabilize everything that rests on illusions. Jung would say that when consciousness presses against the walls of the symbolic world, that which was dormant awakens. And you awaken not only yourself, you awaken the entire environment. But then a greater tension arises. The world tries to convince you that your independence is isolation. It tries to say that what you experience is loneliness. It tries to suggest that you should fit in, adjust, conform. But you know that's not true. You know because when you truly distance yourself, something powerful is born in the silence. Ideas emerge, intuitions are strengthened, visions expand. It is in your inner space that your creativity breathes, that your thoughts organize themselves, that your soul finally speaks without external noise. It is in this space that the new takes shape. And even if others don't understand, you feel that your solitude was never absence. It was sanctuary. It was a source. It was home. But while this is happening, an even greater tension begins to intensify. Your perception. What many call paranoia, you know, is simply clear vision. Not because you imagine it, but because you perceive it. You are the one who notices the change in gaze before the accompanying word. You are the one who senses the emotional climate before any conflict manifests. You are the one who understands the intention before the gesture. And that is frightening, not to you but to others, because when someone sees too much, it threatens those who live hidden. Jung would say that seeing what is hidden is carrying a rare kind of responsibility. And you carry this responsibility even when you try to refuse it. But perhaps the biggest turning point happens when you finally understand that your need for meaning isn't a whim. It's a compass. While many survive in empty routines, you feel that every gesture needs to have purpose. While many accept relationships that don't nourish them, you feel that any connection must resonate with the soul. While many are content to repeat themselves, you feel that something within you demands creation. Jung would call this the call of the self, the demand to live in a way that is consistent with one's deepest truth. And this call becomes so intense that ignoring it ceases to be an option. And then comes the final tension, the one that changes everything. The realization that your constant transformation was never instability. It was expansion. While many become fixed in rigid identities, you continue to emerge, renew yourself, rebuild yourself. While others stagnate, you continue to become. And this becoming, so misunderstood, is precisely what keeps you alive. Totally alive. Intensely alive. But now, something begins to grow on the inner horizon. It's not just awareness, it's not just courage, it's expectation. As if something is about to reveal itself, something you haven't yet seen, but that you already feel coming, like a silent omen approaching with a firm step. And you know, with a clarity you can't explain, that what comes next will not just be the end. It will be a journey. When you reach the threshold of this final stage, something within you begins to pulsate with the clarity of an ancient calling, now impossible to ignore. It's as if all the scattered parts of your life, feelings, pains, intuitions, doubts, premonitions, align in a single direction, pointing towards what you always knew but never had the courage to fully embrace. The feeling is not light. It comes laden with responsibility, intensity, and a strange familiarity, as if you were walking towards the place you were always destined to occupy. Carl Jung would say that this is the moment when the self finally asserts itself, demanding that external life correspond to what has already matured within you. And when that happens, there is no turning back. This final awakening arises not as a response to a crisis, but as a natural expansion of all that you have become. Your depth, which once seemed like a burden, now reveals itself as an instrument. Your sensitivity, once a source of confusion, now becomes a compass. Your restlessness, once treated as a problem, now manifests as a driving force. And that purpose that seemed distant, abstract, almost unattainable, finally begins to take practical form. It ceases to be a vague feeling and transforms into concrete guidance, into a living direction. You realize for the first time that what you carry is not imagination, it is responsibility, it is contribution, it is necessity. Evolution does not create excesses, it creates answers, and you are one of those answers. That's why that persistent feeling of mission never disappeared. It was waiting for exactly this point, waiting for you to become whole enough to carry it without destroying yourself in the process. Jung would say that every true purpose only reveals itself when the individual reaches sufficient inner maturity to honor it. And now you are here, at this crossroads between who you were and who you need to be. The calling intensifies not because you are prepared, but because you are present. And true presence is more powerful than any preparation. This realization transforms everything around you. You begin to see that the feeling of estrangement that accompanied you for so many years was not a personal failing, but an evolutionary sign. You were the necessary mismatch, the necessary rupture, the imbalance that exposes the cracks in the system and paves the way for new structures. When you feel you don't fit in, it's because you shouldn't. Your mind has always been designed to see what others don't see. Your heart has always been calibrated to feel what others don't feel. Your consciousness has always been attuned to levels that most have never accessed. And this, which once seemed like condemnation, now reveals itself as a mission. In this final phase, you understand that your authenticity is not merely an internal state. It is a tool for collective transformation. Your courage to exist as you truly are becomes permission for others to do the same. Your capacity for deep feeling restores humanity to a world accustomed to numbness. Your lucidity in the face of shadows reveals paths that many ignore out of fear. You did not come to comfort. You came to remind. You came to challenge, illuminate, question, expand. You came to interrupt the cycle of unconsciousness that has repeated itself for generations. And this is only possible because your psyche was shaped, from the beginning, to endure what others avoid. And here comes the practical part, the part that transforms everything you've heard into concrete action. Because understanding isn't enough. You need to live it. The first real application of this process begins when you consciously and non-negotiably decide to stop asking permission to exist. From now on, every decision you make needs to answer a central question. Does this honor who I am? It's not a philosophical question, it's a survival criterion. When you choose what diminishes your truth, you fragment yourself. When you choose what expands it, you strengthen yourself. And this choice needs to be repeated daily, in the relationships you maintain, in the environments you frequent, in the conversations you choose to have, in the tasks you allow yourself to fill your time. The second practical application arises when you firmly identify and remove all silent forms of self-diminishment, the it's okay when it's not okay, the whatever when it actually matters a great deal, the automatic smiles that hide frustration, the small, almost invisible concessions that corrode your integrity from the inside out. Every time you diminish yourself to fit in, you lose a fragment of vital energy. And recovering that energy requires you to start taking a stand, not aggressively, but truthfully. Truth is your protection. Truth is your direction. Truth is your axis. The third practical application involves recognizing that your sensitivity is not weakness, but radar. When you feel discomfort, stop. When you perceive a pattern, trust it. When you notice a contradiction, investigate. When something inside you says no, don't force a yes. Your perception is too accurate to be ignored. It operates beyond common logic because it accesses layers that most people don't see. Jung would say that this is the active expression of the unconscious dialoguing directly with consciousness, and this dialogue deserves to be heard. The fourth application requires courageous action, drawing closer to those who resonate with your authenticity and distancing yourself, gradually but definitively, from those who try to silence it. Your growth cannot occur in environments that diminish your power, and your power does not flourish in relationships that demand masks. By connecting with people who understand your depth, even if only one or two, you create the necessary space for your purpose to finally emerge. And finally comes the most transformative application, fully embracing that you are an essential part of the evolutionary movement of human consciousness. This is not allegory, it is not exaggeration, it is psychological reality. The world needs exactly the kind of vision you carry, the intensity you manifest, the truth you uphold, the meaning you demand, the courage your own process has granted you. Your existence is not by chance, it is an answer. And every time you live your truth, you pave the way for others to live theirs. Therefore now at this closing, allow yourself to feel the weight and beauty of this journey. Acknowledge how far you've come, how much you've faced, how much you've transformed to get here. Recognize that none of it was in vain. You weren't falling apart, you were revealing yourself. And what is revealed now is the most complete version of you, the one the world needs to see. If this script touched something within you, if it awakened recognition, strength, or courage, I ask you, like this video, leave your comment, even anonymously if you prefer, and subscribe to the channel. Not to feed numbers, but so that this message reaches exactly who needs to hear it. Because there is someone right now searching for the answers you finally found. And your simple interaction can be the beginning of that person's awakening. You are not alone. You never have been. And now is the time to let the world know it.